This is Let's Talk Chattanooga Real Estate, the podcast where we cover home buying, home selling, home improvement tips and ideas, market trends and developments, and investing in real estate. If you own real estate in the Chattanooga, Tennessee area, or want to own real estate here, then you're in the right place. Let's Talk Chattanooga Real Estate is hosted by Blake Watson, a real estate agent and investor in Tennessee and Georgia.
Welcome to Let's Talk Chattanooga Real Estate. I'm Blake Watson, your host, and I'm a licensed realtor with Epique Realty. Today, my guest is Lisa McCluskey. She's the founder and host of the Silver Divorce podcast. Now, you may be wondering, what does divorce have to do with real estate? Well, it has a lot to do with real estate when the couple that's divorcing owns real estate. In fact, I was just thinking how several of the houses I've sold just this year were being sold as the result of divorce. And so I'm looking forward to learning more about Lisa's experience and expertise that she's gained by going through this process of starting a podcast to help those who are facing divorce or have been divorced recently. So Lisa, thanks for being on the podcast and welcome.
Thank you, Blake. I am so happy to be here. And it is a very entwined topic, divorce and real estate. We hear so often people who have been married for decades, they don't know what their options are and what they should do.
Yeah.
So I thought today we could address some of those options and then talk about some of the unintended consequences of the decisions that are made as well.
Absolutely.
So let me tell you just a little bit about the Silver Divorce podcast. The podcast was started in March of this year, and it came about because of my own divorce. I was married for 34 years, and then 17 months after I retired, I was faced with an unexpected divorce. And in going through that process, not only are you dealing with the emotional trauma of losing a long-time relationship, but then also there are the legal implications of divorce, and they are very complicated.
Yes.
In our state, divorce doesn't happen easily. It typically takes about 10 months to a year for the divorce process to complete. There's so much that you don't know. You don't know what's going to happen to you, when it's going to happen to you, and how. You're in this state of uncertainty for months. And as I was going through that process, I spent a lot of time researching not only the laws, what my rights were, what I needed to be providing and why. And I also spent time talking to other people who have been through it and realized there is a huge knowledge gap. And, which is normal. If you've been married for 3 decades like I was, it doesn't even cross your mind what happens if we would divorce. So you don't know what to do. So I thought, with the rise in podcasting, the number of people that are listening every day, it would be a good opportunity to bring that knowledge to people and also bring together some experts who can provide more insight and knowledge and just help people with the emotional trauma, but then help them with the knowledge they need to help them in and I like to say the fight of the divorce process, because so many times it does come down to a fight.
I was thinking about some of the topics that you covered. I mean, yes, we're going to talk about real estate and a house that the couple may own during a divorce, but there's so many other topics that you're covering in the podcast. What are some of those topics?
Right. We want to cover everything from the emotional aspects to relationships. When a couple that has been married for decades gets divorced, oftentimes their kids are older, they're adults. And so it puts those kids through a traumatic process as well. Not only often are they somewhat caught in the middle with being told stories from one side or the other, but they start looking at their own relationship. They may have kids of their own, and because they're older, they may not have been around you every day. They may not have realized there was trouble. They may have thought, my parents are solid, they're great. And then suddenly you're divorcing and they're thinking, oh my gosh, if this can happen to you, what about me? And I can tell you my kids were hugely affected by that. They told me they used to brag about us to their friends, about what a solid marriage we had. So we address relationships with adult children. We address how to handle relationships with young children as well. How do you have those conversations with the young children who are concerned about their personal safety? They want to know, where am I going to live? Am I still going to go to school? What about my friends? Of course, money. Money is a big topic that we address for divorce, before and after. How should I handle my money? What are the tax implications of some of the decisions I need to make in the divorce process? If I take a buyout, if I take a rollover from a 401k, how is that going to affect me from a tax perspective?
Yeah.
So we run the gamut from, the nuts and bolts of what to do if you're thinking about buying a house to managing those relationships.
I do want to point out, while we're about to start into talking about a house, that we are not lawyers.
That's right.
We're not attorneys, and we're not accountants either. So we're not certified in either one of those areas. However, we do have personal experience, and I am a licensed realtor, so I certainly can address housing. But let's talk about a house in a divorce.
Sure.
And how does that come into play when a couple, especially one that's been married for a while, owns a house and has built some equity in that property? How do they deal with that?
Sure, and I'm glad you made the point about us not being attorneys. So in a divorce, when there is a house, the decision needs to be made. Does someone buy the other one out? Do we sell the house? What happens and what are those implications? The recommendation that we receive the most from those who are attorneys and accountants is have somebody come and appraise the house who is a certified appraiser. And the reason they say that is two reasons. One, if you have a certified appraisal done, then not only will it help you determine what the equity is, and equity is the appraised price minus your debt, and that is the equity. And that's what you typically look at splitting. That equity, it should be most of the time 50-50. There are some states that allow for the consideration of who made the most money or who put the most into it, but you really do need to look at your state laws for that. So get that certified appraisal so you know what your starting point is.
Absolutely.
And the other reason for that is if you are going to buy out the house, your bank will accept that appraisal.
Correct.
So it'll somewhat speed up that refinancing process because you have a certified appraisal. If you're going to sell the house, well, you already have the value in place, and the buyer's bank is likely to accept that certified appraisal. So, there are many reasons for doing that. And then when it comes down to you have your appraisal, you know what the value is, and you're trying to determine from a 50-50 split, what are we going to do about the value in that house? Then it comes into how does a buyout work? And that's where people really get very confused. Does it have to be a cash buyout? And from my experience, it does not. You can use other assets to make up for the value in that house. So, for example, you'll be asked to do a complete inventory of all your possessions in the house and put a value on those possessions. And that includes your cars, your boats, your trailers, anything with a motor, I tell people. So you can trade.
Lawnmowers should be.
Right,
we
lawnmowers,
talked about that earlier.
Right.
Yeah.
Especially those $8,000 riding tractor lawnmowers, those zero turns. You can start to trade that for the value. So if you have an equity of your home of, say, it's $300,000, well, you're going to get credit for $150,000 and your spouse is going to get credit for $150,000. So how do you pay out that $150,000? Well, maybe it's a portion of giving up your right to part of a 401k. You're going to let that person keep more of a 401k. Or maybe it's a combination. I'm going to give up $60,000 in a 401k, and I'm going to let that person have this vehicle valued at this much money, or that mower valued at this much money. And that's where it becomes somewhat of an asset trading game. It doesn't all have to be, I have to come up with $150,000 in cash to pay out that equity in the house.
That's good information. And if someone is determining that they are going to sell the house, which often is the case, that it just needs to be sold because there's not enough money to buy somebody out. And that's what I've seen a lot, is there's so much equity that the only way is to sell the house and divide that equity in that manner. How have you seen couples deal with that, and someone living in the house while the other one maybe moves on to another home or some other apartment or whatever?
I've seen multiple ways. One where one person agrees to stay in the home and the other agrees to contribute to expenses of the home for a certain period of time until the house sells and they move out. And I've also seen it where both houses stay in the home. They somewhat, divide up their areas, and we're going to continue to live in this home until it sells. So it can be dependent upon how amicable your divorce is or not amicable as to, and it also depends on your safety. If you feel safe being in the home with that spouse, then it might work out where you can both stay in the home until the home sells. But one of the recommendations I have, people often forget, is how are you going to pay for getting the house ready to sell, or are you going to sell it as is? And if you have one spouse who says, I'm not going to pay anything to get this house ready, then there has to be in the agreement a clause that says the expenses to get the house ready to sell come from the proceeds, and you have to be prepared to address that. Because in reality, if you've been in that home for many years, it may have been 5-7 years since you've painted. You may need to upgrade. How is that going to happen? Where's that money going to come from? And that really should be addressed as part of your agreement.
As a realtor, my job is to help my client, whoever is selling the house, to not only attain the most money they can from the sale, but also on the terms that they would like, if they need to move quickly, or they're not in a hurry, whatever that may be. Yeah. So I always advise people, yes, you need to clean it up and do the best you can with as you mentioned, paint or whatever is affordable to do. Or if there's something that's going to be expensive, that's going to be a concern to a buyer, it really needs to be addressed one way or the other. Either you're saying, hey, this is broken, it needs a new roof or whatever it is, but we're going to give you some money to put a new roof on at closing. That's always a possibility. If you've got two spouses that are not agreeing on getting expenses handled to get the property in the best shape they can, well, you may be kind of shooting yourself in the foot, because then the house won't sell for as much, or it'll take a whole lot longer to sell, and it'll be problematic selling it.
And that's what it comes down to, bringing in a realtor who can give you advice. And that is something in my initial phases of the divorce, when the appraiser came through, I asked a lot of questions like, what do you see people doing? What from your perspective would be the best thing to focus on? But have somebody come in and do a tour of your house and give you those ideas on what you should do prior to listing that would increase the value. Because ultimately, you both need as much as you can get in order to buy somewhere to live and have a place. So as much as you don't perhaps want to cooperate with your soon-to-be ex-spouse, it's in your best interest to do that. This is one area where, you need to put ego and pride aside and try to work it out together.
Very true. And I think I have seen, at least in this process with different people, that the professionals that are helping them through this are generally trying to do the best they can for both parties. And certainly a realtor is going to try to do the best they can. It doesn't matter which party, because they're going to be splitting it. They just want to do the best they can for their client, which is the husband and wife. And then if it's another person, that's a professional, the appraiser certainly is just trying to do the best job they can too.
Right. And the appraiser has a good idea of your neighborhood. They're looking at comps in your neighborhood, and so I tended to ask questions around what they're seeing in the neighborhood, and it's helpful to get different perspectives because it helps you to make decisions when you're getting that outside input, the unbiased input.
Yes, the unbiased input. And I know that so many decisions in divorce are made emotionally and sometimes quickly. I've seen that with clients. As a landlord, I've seen that a lot. People will get a divorce and just sometimes walk away. Rental houses that we've come to after someone is divorced, and they've left things that you can't believe that they left behind. Things that are family heirlooms, perhaps, photographs of their children in school, whatever it may be. And then of course, sometimes things of value that they've just walked away.
Yeah, I can tell you there are a number of people that I've talked to who said, I just wanted it done with. I just let her have everything, or I let him have everything. I didn't want to fight. And a year later, they regret doing that because it is your future. It is what you're going to be left with after the divorce. So you need to think very carefully through your decisions. And it's helpful to have somebody who is independent, who is not making decisions based on emotions, but can give you some valued input based on what's best for your financial situation. And maybe that is a financial advisor. Maybe that is the realtor who can give you an idea of the market. Just the more input you have from independent people, the better able you are to make decisions, keeping the emotions out of it.
Yeah, it's a tough road. What about if you are choosing this option of buying out your spouse?
Yeah.
And we were talking before we started recording just about some of the challenges that are unforeseen for many people that they don't realize home ownership actually will bring additional costs that they weren't expecting.
Oh, that's right. I think I must have the gold trophy for not thinking through unintended consequences. Often, especially for women who tend to think, I want to stay in the house. This is my home. I've built a home here. Or maybe your kids are at the end of, high school, and you won't want to let them get through that. It is far beyond just what the mortgage is going to cost you. There are so many additional considerations, and we all know insurance and we all know taxes, but with home values increasing, you have to take into consideration your insurance will increase as well, especially at the clip home values were increasing in our area. My home value went up 20%, so my insurance went up more than that. Then the other things that you have to think about are, for example, we have a standalone garage and there's a propane tank there, and there was an agreement that you would fill it at least 1.5 times a year. Well, now that that garage isn't being used as a man cave and there's no propane use being happening, I have to make a decision either to buy that tank outright or keep doing something with it.
Yeah, and going out there and heating the garage.
I know,
right?
I never even thought about it. That's a $1,400 expense.
Yeah.
And you have to think about, do you have a termite contract? Maybe that's a $500 annual expense. Or a quarterly bug contract. Your garbage contract. How much are you paying for that? And then there are those other expenses that you don't think about. What if a gutter comes down, or how do you keep up with normal maintenance day to day? And you have to have a budget for that. After I signed off and the house was mine, my dishwasher went out, my stovetop went out, and suddenly, look around your house. If you've been in the same house and it's been the same appliances for the last 15 years, they're all going to come of age at the same time.
They are.
So do you have money for a fund to put those things aside? So you have to sit down, and just like you would do a monthly budget, you have to think through those items that you only pay occasionally. You only pay once a year. What are they? What are they going to cost? And then decide, can I live on this or not? And in divorce, women typically experience a 45% decrease in their standard of living. After divorce, people who are in that gray divorce area, 25% of women are living in poverty. So if you make a decision to keep your house, and yet all of these expenses are crashing down on you, you are going to be, house rich, but living in poverty with everything else. And I'm going to say one more thing about the house, and that's going to be the daggone yard.
You were not mowing your own grass.
I am. Not back then. No. The agreement was he took care of the outside, I took care of the inside. You have to think about the equipment.
Ouch.
I had nothing. I didn't have a mower, a blower, a weed eater, and I had to go out and buy all of that. And when I had services come give me a quote on what it would cost to do it, I couldn't afford them. So I'm doing it myself, and that's just another aspect that as a woman you may not think about when you're considering, should I keep this house?
Yeah.
So really sit down, put it all down on paper, and make an informed decision as to, long term, is this house going to put me into poverty?
Yeah, and it certainly can. And I think when people buy a house, hopefully they do for the first time, and talking with a professional, talking with a realtor about what are some of the expenses of just owning a house will help them understand there's more to it than just the house payment, just as you
Absolutely.
said. There's more to it than the house payment. But it sounds like when there's divorce and there's this emotional tie to the house, that one spouse wants to remain in the house very badly and wants to go ahead and be bought out or buy out the other spouse, there may be some unexpected costs.
That's right.
You just, because you've been living there, you had no idea.
No.
It's not like you were evaluating a brand new proposition here.
Right. Or maybe you were living there and you were paying the bills, so you knew these bills were there, but you had two incomes and it wasn't a burden at the time.
Yeah.
And so think about that. And then also, perhaps if you decide, I want to stay in the house because my kids are in their last years of high school, and maybe that is an agreement that can be worked out, whereby the house is sold in 2 years. And then, at the end of the 2-year period, when the kids are through school, the decision is made to buy the house, and you can get a new appraisal, and you work through it then.
Yeah.
But really lay out all your options, and don't just get stuck on one option because you're emotionally drawn to that option.
So do you have any other thoughts or advice for people that are dealing with divorce and maybe we haven't covered?
Right. I would say seek resources to help you with your decisions, not only the professionals, but there are, like my podcast, the
Sure.
Silver Divorce Podcast is a wonderful resource. There's some great Facebook groups devoted to gray divorce and silver divorce. And just try to become as knowledgeable as you can as you're going through the process, and that will help you. And finally, take care of you. Self-care tends to go by the wayside. Make sure that perhaps you see a therapist. And a lot of people don't know Medicare will pay for therapy sessions. So, seek out a therapist. There's also help online, BetterHelp. But in our region, there are a number of wonderful therapists, and they help you with the emotional side. And if you're well, and I won't say well as you're going through a divorce, but if you're feeling stronger emotionally, you're going to make better decisions financially.
Well, you've got a great podcast, and you're doing a great thing by sharing your own personal experience, which I know must have been horrible and probably still is in many ways. But it's really a blessing to others to be able to learn from what you've gone through and what you're helping through your podcast and bringing these experts to talk to.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. It is a passion of mine now, and my mission to help people get through it a little bit easier than I did, avoid the pitfalls that I fell into. And believe me, I fell into many pitfalls. I always say, if I'd known what I know now when I was going through it, I might have done things a little differently. So just hoping to help people.
Yeah. Lisa McCluskey is my guest, and she is the founder and host of the Silver Divorce podcast. You can find it, I guess, anywhere the podcasts are available.
Right. On any platform. We're on 17 platforms. So everything from Amazon to Spotify, Apple, YouTube podcast, you name it, we're on the podcasting platform. Just search for Silver Divorce Podcast.
Silver Divorce Podcast. And I'd like to mention, too, I have a book that is titled A Guide to Selling Your Home After Divorce. And it's one that I am glad to give to listeners for free. If you just contact me while supplies last, I'm happy to provide this to you for free. Just let me know, and I'll give you my contact information. Lisa, so good to have you on the podcast today.
Thank you, Blake, for having me.
Absolutely. And I'm Blake Watson, agent with Epique Realty. My mobile phone is 423-315-1815, and my brokerage office phone is 888-893-3537. You can find me on Facebook and LinkedIn as Blake Watson and on Instagram as Rock and Roll Blake. My website is athomechattanooga.com. And if this podcast has been helpful, well, please share this podcast with a friend and follow this podcast so you won't miss an episode. And again, as I mentioned, I do have a book that I'm happy to give you a free copy of it. It's called A Guide to Selling Your Home After Divorce. And if you would like a copy, or you know a friend who could use a copy, well, please contact me and I'll be glad to get that to you. And I wish you all the best in your real estate journey.